delighted to be in Georgia for the first time, and I'm approaching the topic of the Caucasus in history and myth from my viewpoint as an Assyriologist, a specialist in ancient Mesopotamia and more specifically the Assyrian Empire. The title of my talk therefore is Holy Mountains, Perspectives from the Assyrian Empire. And obviously I will start with a map. As you can see here, the pink blob in the center is the Kingdom of Assyria in the period before the mid-8th century, whereas the orange blob further to the north is Urartu, an equally powerful kingdom of almost the same dimensions up to that point. These two states remain the dominant powers in the Middle East until the end of the 7th century. And for the period of their coexistence, let's say from the 9th to the 7th century, their relationship is full with tensions. Most of the time there is no direct contact, and we can describe this as a type of Cold War that is very often a very hot war, but typically not at the borders between these two states, but in more remote areas, typically in northern Syria or in western Iran. Now, Urartu obviously is the state that blocks any direct contact between Assyria and the Caucasus region. And what we have that deals with that far north from an Assyrian perspective is always through the filter of the Urartian tradition. Nevertheless, I think it is worthwhile to explore common ground between the Caucasus and the regions of the Assyrian Empire, despite the fact, as I said, that Urartu and Assyria are basically not on speaking terms, and that there is really no chance of a direct interaction from the 9th to the 7th century. Okay, I want to stress that Urartu is a state whose dominant language is a Hurrian language. We've already heard about the importance of the Hurrian tradition in Levan's talk. We have to remind ourselves that from at least the mid-3rd millennium BC onwards, the Hurrian language family is one of the most important language families to be spoken and also recorded in the Middle East, not just in Anatolia, but in Mesopotamia and also in the western areas of Iran. Yeah? This language family includes Urartian, and that is the most prominent Hurrian language of the 1st millennium BC, but by no means the only one. We can also point our attention to Shudria. This is the sort of purple little blob between the orange and the pink one in the headwaters of the Tigris. That too is a Hurrian kingdom. Yeah? And there too we know from Assyrian sources that the language was Hurrian. Yeah? Okay, so I want to stress that although mainly investigations into Hurrian focus on the Hittite period, the mid-2nd millennium, the late Bronze Age, because that is when we have the most written sources, the Hurrian language family survives well into the 1st millennium, and Urartu is a Hurrian-speaking state. Yeah? Regardless of whether there were other languages. I mean, there are, of course, this is a big state, and it's very likely that there would be other languages spoken there as well. Okay, so after 744, the political geography changes quite dramatically in the Middle East, and with the campaigns of Tbilisi III, Assyria manages to increase its directly controlled territories dramatically, but that doesn't change the situation vis-à-vis the eastern Anatolia and the Caucasus, because despite the fact that Urartu's power is reduced during that time, it still controls this area. So it's just important to me to stress that at no point in time is there any direct interaction between Assyria and the Caucasus. And yet, if we look at concepts such as the concept of the holy, the sacred, the deified mountains, we see a lot of commonalities, and that's what I will explore now. We have already mentioned Volker Thas in Levan's talk. This is a book that I enjoyed very much when I was a student in the 1990s. I was lucky to learn Hittite with Volker Thas in Berlin, and of course myths, and Anatolian myths specifically, and also their links to the Greek and the Caucasian world were one of his favorite topics to explore. And this was a book in which he tried to really popularize these very, very important findings. It's called Hethitische Berggötter und Hurritische Steindämonen, so Hittite mountain gods and Hurrian stone demons. And this book, well, at first it affects all of Munich. How do I get this to come back, please? The next one, please, yeah. Thank you. So, and this book traces the mythology and the literary traditions from Hurrian Hittite Anatolia, as I said, mainly in the 2nd millennium, into the Caucasus. That's the last chapter of the book. And he focuses on several very interesting topics, but the ones that are of interest to me now are the concept of the deified or sacred mountain. That's something that's also very, very important in Urartu. I won't really go into that, but in Urartu the majority of deities are really mountains that are seen also as gods and can be seen as separate from the mountain. And the other thing is what he terms Steingeburtsmythos, so that's the idea that a deity, a demon, or a hero emerges from the rock. Not so much the soil, but the rock. Yeah? So he emphasizes that this is something that is very prominent in this Hurrian Hittite ensemble of myth, and that's also very prominent in Georgian mythology. And he emphasizes that this is not something that is found very much elsewhere in the world. So that's interesting then. Okay, so therefore I decided to focus on the stone and mountain dimension, because as we shall see, despite the fact that there is no direct interaction for the majority of the early 1st millennium between northern Mesopotamia and the Caucasus, also in northern Mesopotamia, during that time, the idea of the mountain as a god or the mountain as a very special place is very prominent. And I will focus on two regions. The first region is the region of the central Zagros, where I've conducted fieldwork for the past 10 years or so. It's the region of the Assyrian province of Zamua or Matzamua, it's the same thing. And a millennium earlier, this is the region of the kingdom of Simurum. Yeah? Simurum is already attested in the late 3rd millennium BC as an adversary and as a destination of campaigns of the kings of Akkad, and that continues into the Old Babylonian period. So a very long-lived state that was around for at least half a millennium. Yeah? One of those many states of the ancient Middle East that at one point were very, very important, but that remained forgotten. There are only a handful of people in the world that know that Simurum at some point was really a grand power in the central Zagros. Okay, now the history of Simurum ends in the Middle Bronze Age, and when the Assyrian documentation of the region begins in the 9th century, we still see memories of Simuru traditions. We have campaign reports that then give also ancient toponyms and so on that we can link back to this state. And that's what we are going to focus on now. And I want to focus on two holy mountains, one of which was definitely a god of the people of Timurum, and the other one was for sure a very, very sacred place, and possibly also deified previously. The first mountain, the first mountain is Mount Nishpa, Hauraman, that's the lower cross here. And the other one is Mount Nimush, also known as Mount Kinaba, that's the top cross. Nishpa can be identified with the Hauraman range, which is today directly at the border between Iran and Iraq, the Kurdish region of Iraq, whereas Mount Nimush is the Piramagrun, that is actually the highest elevation in this part of the Zagros chain, and that is just behind the modern city of Sulaymaniyah. Until today, it's seen as a sacred spot. There is a holy, there's a prophet buried up there. There's a spring coming out of the mountain, and there is a little shrine with a cemetery. People go there to, express wishes, tie up stones in the trees, and so on and so forth. So until today, this is seen as a very holy place, whereas the Hauraman, being a border region, doesn't enjoy that much visitors nowadays. Here on the side, you see some of the most prominent remains of the Kingdom of Timurum, these rock reliefs and rock inscriptions. They don't concern us so very much, but I just wanted you to have a visual pointer of what we have here. The majority of our sources about Timurum are actually evidence from Mesopotamia, from southern Mesopotamia, because Timurum was a trade partner, but also an adversary in war over centuries, as I said. From Timurum itself, we have the archaeological documentation and these rock reliefs and some rock inscriptions. But that's not as well explored as one would hope, I would say. The main thing for me is that we emphasize that this is a Hurrian-speaking kingdom. Yeah? Okay. So, now here is a view of the Hauraman of Mount Nishpa, and from the inscriptions, these rock inscriptions of the kings of Timurum, we know that Nishpa, together with Nin Isyana, is the main deity that at least the royal family worships. Both of these are called my god, vis-a-vis the rulers. Yeah? Nin Isyana is the Venus star, whether it is female or male, depends on the culture. It has to be stressed, because Venus is both male and female. And in these texts, the deity is called my god, not my goddess, so it stands to reason that it's conceived as a male deity. And the other deity is Mount Nishpa, and that is this peak that you can see here. Yeah? Okay, so when we turn to Mount Nimush, that's the Piramagrun, that is a more substantial mountain, 2,624 meters high. Sometimes you still have snow up there as late as May. This is seen here from the Karadar Mountains opposite. The Charizor plain lies between here, and it looks in this photograph, and that's why I've used it. I've taken many pictures of the Piramagrun. It looks as if the mountain emerges from the sea, from the water. And that is indeed what this mountain signifies to the Mesopotamian tradition. In the Mesopotamian tradition of the flood, it is Mount Nimush where the ark lands. I'm sure many of you know that the oldest traditions about the flood are attested in Mesopotamia, a very, very long time before any such traditions are attested, both in the classical and the biblical tradition. And the Mesopotamian Noah is either called Atrahasis, which means just extra wise, the wisest of men, or Utanapishtim. Yeah? And the story is very well known. It's basically the same story as the one in the Bible. Only the motives of the gods are different, but that doesn't need to concern us. What is important is that in the Mesopotamian tradition, it is this mountain that is the place where the ark lands. And in this way, it's mentioned in the Gilgamesh epic in tablet 11. On Mount Nemosh, the boat ran aground. Mount Nemosh held the boat fast and did not let it move. And then time passes, and then the story with the raven and the pigeon. Yeah. Okay. So from a Caucasus point of view, 2,600 meters is not impressive, I admit that. Even from an Austrian point of view, where I come from, this is not, the highest mountain on earth. But from a Mesopotamian tradition, this is really the most impressive mountain coming from the plains. Yeah? It's by no means even the highest mountains in the Zagros Massif, but if you come from the plains, and the Charizor is of course at the Ala plain, then this is the most remarkable mountain that you can see, especially as it rises so high and so sharp above the plain. Therefore, I want to point out that, of course, also at Mount Elbrus, there is a tradition that sees it as a landing point of the ark, the first but unsuccessful landing point of the ark. The mountain rejected the boat, and therefore God cursed it. Okay. And Ararat then, of course, is seen by most as the eventual point where the ark landed. So, I think it's important to stress the fact that the traditions concerning the flood are very, very old in Mesopotamia. They go back as well to the 3rd millennium. There are no mountains, of course, in Mesopotamia. That's known to all of you, I'm sure. And the sheer fact that the mountains play this important role should be of interest to us. Yeah? We can't just see this as a Mesopotamian tradition, because it invites us really to think about mountains and how they sort of stick out of this flat world with which we deal otherwise. Of course, there are many, many stories about mountains in Mesopotamia otherwise, but this is the one that has the clearest link to the Caucasus, and that's why I wanted to emphasize it. Here's a view of Mount Nemosh, just to really emphasize how sharp the mountain rises out of the plain. Okay, now, so what I want to emphasize is that when Haas very aptly writes about Hittite and Hurrian mythological traditions, what's always missing is the other parts of the Hurrian world, because the Hurrian world is much, much larger than just Anatolia. It's just there that we happen to have the most information from, but we have to be aware of the fact that northern Mesopotamia, including western Iran, in the 3rd and well into the 2nd millennium, of course, were Hurrian areas as well, and we should therefore try to look for connections there as well. And if we now turn briefly to Central Assyria, then it's important to me to really emphasize that at the heart of the Assyrian Empire, in Assur, the city of Assur, we have the very unusual situation that the city and the mountain on which this city rests, as well as the deity that is both this mountain and the city, are called Assur, and that their deity is a mountain deity, despite the fact that from a Caucasus perspective, and even from a Zagros perspective, the height of this mountain is not very impressive. But again, in the local perspective, it's a real landmark, and it causes the Tigris to shift direction by 90 degrees, so it is something. Okay, so here's Assur in the center here of our blob. And here is a depiction from the mid-2nd millennium BC of the god Assur, in the way in which in this Mesopotamian, Anatolian, Koine mountain deities are depicted. Please have a look at this skirt, so to say, which looks as if it has a fish scale pattern. What this really is the mountain rising up from the ground and the deity emerges from it. So that the deity is not wearing a skirt, but this is the mountain from which the deity rises. The deity has various flowers or shrubs growing from the hips, and that's also very typical. Mountains are always seen as centers of vegetation, of growth. And we have these mountain goats feeding from the plants, and the deity is accompanied by two smaller deities that have both vessels in their hands from which water streams. This too is the conventional way of depicting a deified spring. Yeah? So here we see the god Assur, who corresponds to the mount of Assur, and this is part of the mountain range Ebich, with two sacred springs. And this relief was found during the excavations in the early early 20th century BC, and has been most convincingly dated into the Hurrian period, into the mid-2nd millennium BC, because at that time Assur was not an independent kingdom, but was a city within this Hurrian state of Mitanni. Yeah? Okay. And again, the curse. Here, if we briefly look at the map of Assur and a recent drone photograph that we took in the spring, you can see how this rocky outcrop that houses the shrine of Assur rises from the Tigris, and how the river changes direction, because this rock really hinders the river from just traveling further downstream. Okay, and here's the city of Assur as it already looked at the time of this relief. I told you in the car, Ivane, that we now have C14 dates right down here that show that already in the 16th century this part of the city existed. So Assur at that time already was a very sizable city within this Hurrian larger state. And at that time, the temple existed for at least 1,000 years. Who knows, possibly longer, we don't know that. But in any case, the temple sits on the rock, and the rock is the god Assur. Yeah? And that, of course, links even the center of the Assyrian Empire to these very old, ancient Hurrian traditions. The god Assur cannot be separated from this rock. The god has an identity beyond the rock, of course, but there is no other temple of the god Assur anywhere else in the world, because it cannot be cannot be separated from this very place. And that too is a very, very distinct tradition that sets this deity completely apart from all other deities of important Mesopotamian cities. So I think we really have to emphasize how much Assyrian culture owes to this Hurrian tradition, and because of that, it is fair enough that I, as an Assyrian specialist, stand here before you and engage with Caucasus in myth and history. Thank you very much.